The radio crackled with desperation, each word fighting through waves of static and gunfire. "Blackbird, Blackbird! We're pinned down, no visual on shooter." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Michael Wilson, once arrogant, now stripped to raw humanity by the prospect of imminent death. 8 elite Delta Force operators, America's deadliest warriors, trapped in a narrow ravine with bullets raining down from 3 directions. Their exits were gone. Their snipers were down. Death was closing in fast. Then through the cacophony of automatic weapons and shouting, something impossible happened. A single rifle shot split the Montana air, traveling over 2,000 meters to find its mark with surgical precision. The enemy machine gunner on the eastern ridge simply crumpled his weapon, falling silent. 10 seconds later, another shot. Another impossible hit. The trapped operators exchanged bewildered glances as their radio sparked to life, with a voice none of them recognized, female, calm, decisive. "Nighthawk active, providing overwatch. Stand by for extraction window." It was the first time since the Gulf War that a Delta Force unit had been completely trapped and rescued by a ghost. 12 hours earlier at Fort Granite, nestled deep in the Montana mountains, Morgan Sullivan moved through the armory with practiced efficiency. At 42, she cut an unremarkable figure among the young warriors preparing for deployment. Her left hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the specialized medical wrap around her wrist. Advanced magnetic therapy technology originally developed for astronauts, now her daily companion for managing chronic nerve damage. The prescription medication she'd taken that morning cost 10 times more than regular painkillers, but it was the only thing that kept her hands steady enough for the precise work of weapons maintenance. Most of the soldiers barely noticed her existence, just another support staff member keeping their gear functional while they did the real fighting. Master Sergeant Frank Donovan watched her from the doorway. At 63, with 45 years of service etched into the lines of his weathered face, he was a living relic of America's military history. He'd served in operations few Americans would ever hear about, in places that didn't exist on official maps. Like Morgan, he preferred the shadows of the armory to the spotlight. "The new batch is coming in," he said quietly, just loud enough for Morgan to hear over the mechanical sounds of weapons being disassembled and cleaned. She nodded without looking up, her fingers moving with the mechanical precision across the barrel of an M24 sniper rifle. The slight tremor in her left hand disappeared the moment it touched the weapon and muscle memory, overriding nerve damage. "Delta Team, heading out tonight. Blue Sky Test Range." Donovan kept his voice neutral, but Morgan caught the subtle tension in his shoulders. Blue Sky, a nuclear research facility tucked away in the Montana wilderness. High-value target, perfect ambush territory. The armory door swung open and Lieutenant Michael Wilson strode in, followed by his team of elite operators. Fresh from advanced sniper school and full of the confidence that came with youth and untested skill, Wilson surveyed the room with barely concealed disdain. "Donovan," he called loud enough for the entire armory to hear. "You letting a disabled woman handle our weapons now? This is a combat unit, not a charity program." The room fell silent. Several operators shifted uncomfortably, but peer pressure and military hierarchy kept them quiet. Donovan turned slowly, his eyes cold. "Lieutenant, I've watched her field strip and reassemble an M24 faster than anyone in your team. Blindfolded." Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's so." He looked directly at Morgan, who continued working as if she hadn't heard the exchange. "Well, then maybe she'd like to demonstrate." Morgan's hand paused on the rifle she was inspecting, her knuckles whitening slightly around the barrel. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in her gray eyes, the cold calculation of someone deciding whether violence was worth the consequences. "The Chaytak M200 needs an inspection before deployment," Donovan said, nodding toward the long-range precision rifle in its case. "Might as well make it a demonstration." Without a word, Morgan set down the rifle she'd been working on and moved to the case containing the Chaytak. The weapon was a masterpiece of engineering capable of extreme precision at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters in the right hands. "Timer starts when you touch it," Wilson said, holding up his watch. "And let's make it interesting. Blindfolded." Donovan handed her a black cloth. Morgan tied it around her eyes without hesitation. The room went silent as she placed her hands on the rifle case. Wilson started his timer with a smirk. What happened next wasn't just skill, it was artistry. Morgan's hands moved with a fluid grace that made everyone watching forget about her tremor. Each component came apart in perfect sequence, laid out in precise order, then reassembled with mechanical efficiency. Her fingers knew every pin, every spring, every tolerance by heart. Iraq, 2008. The sandstorm howled around her position, visibility reduced to mere feet. But Ghost Eye didn't need to see, not in the conventional sense. She had calculated wind vectors, barometric pressure, temperature gradients. The mathematics of death were her second language. Target moving, Martinez whispered beside her, his voice barely audible above the storm. Bravo team is pinned down. They've got 3 minutes before they're overrun. 1,500 meters, through a sandstorm, with a crosswind that changed direction every 8 seconds. Ghost Eye steadied her breathing. Time slowed. Between heartbeats, her fingers squeezed the trigger. One shot, one kill. The radio crackled to life. Holy shit, enemy commander down. Who made that shot? Martinez grinned beneath his tactical mask. Ghost Eye sees all, he whispered. Morgan secured the final component of the Shatters, placed the weapon down, and removed her blindfold. The room remained silent. Wilson checked his timer, his face flushing slightly. 30 seconds faster than the range record, he muttered, putting away his watch. She's never even been to the range, Donovan said quietly. Morgan returned to her workstation without a word, but the atmosphere in the armory had shifted. The operators looked at her differently now, some with curiosity, others with newfound respect. Wilson's mouth tightened into a thin line. He'd been publicly outperformed, and his pride wouldn't let him acknowledge it. Just make sure our weapons are combat ready, he said, his voice carrying forced authority. We deploy at 2100. As the Delta team filed out, Donovan approached Morgan's workbench. You didn't have to make it look that easy, he said with the hint of a smile. Old habits, she replied, her voice soft but precise, carrying a slight accent that was difficult to place. Her left hand had resumed its subtle tremor now that it wasn't occupied with a weapon. Colonel Reynolds wants to see us, Donovan said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Now. Morgan nodded carefully, putting away her tools before following Donovan through the maze of corridors that formed the interior of Fort Granite. Neither spoke as they walked, their footsteps falling into the synchronized rhythm of people who understood the value of silence. Colonel James Reynolds' office stood apart from the standard military aesthetic of the base. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on military history, tactical theory, and surprisingly ornithology. The man himself sat behind a desk cluttered with papers in 3 separate secure tablets. At 55, Reynolds embodied the modern military commander, equally comfortable with traditional warfare and the new battlefields of information and intelligence. He looked up as they entered, his eyes sharp beneath gray brows. Close the door, he said, not bothering with formalities. As the door clicked shut, Reynolds activated a small device on his desk. A soft hum filled the room. Signal jammer, cutting off any possibility of electronic surveillance. I just received orders to deploy Delta Team to Blue Sky, Reynolds said, pushing a tablet across the desk. Intelligence reports indicate a domestic extremist group is planning to breach the facility. Morgan studied the briefing document, her eyes rapidly scanning the details. The intelligence is too clean, she said, her quiet voice carrying absolute certainty. Too perfect. Reynolds nodded, the lines in his face deepening. That's what I thought. Reminds me of a pattern I've seen before. He looked directly at Morgan. In Afghanistan, 2018, Raven Valley. The mention of Raven Valley changed something in Morgan's posture, a subtle shift that only trained operators would notice. Her body coiled slightly, like a spring being compressed. How much do you know? She asked. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. I know about Unit Phantom. I know you were Ghost Eye, their premier long-distance elimination specialist. And I know you were officially listed as KI after the Raven Valley operation. He paused. What I don't know is why you're maintaining weapons in my armory instead of operating in the field or enjoying retirement. Morgan's eyes met his, evaluating, calculating. After a moment, she seemed to reach a decision. I died in that valley because it was the only way to find out who betrayed my team, she said, rolling up her left sleeve to reveal a forearm covered in what looked like random scars. On closer inspection, they formed a pattern, a grid of coordinates. These aren't random, she said, tracing one with her finger. I carved them myself with a piece of metal while I was held for 72 hours. the location of enemy bases' weapons caches, and where they buried the bodies of captured Americans. She rolled her sleeve back down with mechanical precision. The intelligence I gathered led to the largest special operations raid of 2018. 43 hostiles eliminated. 6 American prisoners recovered alive. Her voice dropped. But I was 3 minutes too late to save my own team. Reynolds absorbed this information without visible reaction. And you think Delta Team is walking into a similar trap? The pattern is identical, Morgan confirmed. Perfect intelligence about a high-value target, a narrow approach route with limited extraction options, communications that will be naturally restricted by the terrain. She shook her head. Someone is feeding information designed to draw the unit into a kill zone. I can't officially alter the mission parameters without concrete evidence, Reynolds said. And pulling the team would alert whoever is setting this trap that we're on to them. I don't need official channels, Morgan said. I just need eyes on the operation. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. Master Sergeant Donovan tells me you have maintained your skills despite your injuries. Morgan's left hand twitched slightly as if acknowledging itself as the subject of conversation. Different techniques, same results. There's an observation ridge 2 kilometers east of Blue Sky, Reynolds said, pulling up a topographical map on his tablet. Provides clear lines of sight to all approach vectors. Officially, it's outside our surveillance perimeter. Unofficially, Donovan asked. Unofficially, I can't stop 2 of my personnel from taking unscheduled leave tonight, Reynolds replied. And if they happen to observe anything concerning, I'd hope they'd find a way to communicate that information. Morgan studied the map, her mind already calculating distances, angles, and probable enemy positions. I'll need access to the long-range communications array, she said. And someone needs to make sure my old equipment is still functional. Already taken care of, Donovan said quietly. I've maintained your kit since you arrived, just in case. Morgan's eyebrow raised slightly, the closest she came to showing surprise. Don't look so shocked, the older man said with a hint of a smile. You're not the only ghost in this building. As night fell over the mountains, Delta Team now designated Echo 6 for the operation prepared for insertion. Lieutenant Wilson, his earlier bravado tempered by the reality of the mission ahead, meticulously checked his rifle one more time. The operation seemed straightforward: infiltrate the area surrounding Blue Sky, identify the extremist threat, and neutralize it before any breach of the nuclear research facility could occur. But as their helicopters lifted off into the darkness, Morgan sat in a forgotten corner of the communications building, surrounded by equipment most people at Fort Granite didn't know existed. She'd retrieved a hard case from her personal storage, revealing a Che-Tech M200 intervention rifle that hadn't seen light in 2 years. 3 small notches were carved into the stock, one for each teammate she'd failed to save. The old radio equipment hummed to life as she made adjustments with practiced ease, her tablet displaying encrypted military-grade software originally designed for high-frequency trading algorithms, but repurposed for battlefield signal analysis. System check complete, Donovan said, monitoring the equipment. We're dark to standard frequencies, but I've patched us into the emergency band. If Delta transmits a distress call, we'll hear it. Morgan nodded, her focus already narrowing to the mission ahead. She'd changed from her base uniform into tactical gear, not the latest equipment issued to special forces, but older, well-worn items that had molded to her body through countless operations. The comfort of familiar tools. Transport to observation point leaves in 10 minutes, Donovan continued. I've secured a vehicle with a communications package. We'll maintain contact through the duration. Morgan checked her watch, 1945 hours. Just enough time to reach the observation point before Delta Team arrived at Blue Sky. Morgan, Donovan said, his voice softer now. If this goes sideways, it won't, she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for doubt. If it does, he continued, remember that you're not alone this time. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed ordinary to most, but Morgan couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her with anything resembling kindness. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, before returning to her equipment check. The patterns were there if you knew how to look. Subtle anomalies in enemy communication patterns. Intelligence that was too perfect, suggesting someone was baiting a trap. She had tried to warn her team 5 years ago through official channels, but the mission was already in motion. Command wouldn't abort based on the suspicions of a single operator, even one with her reputation. Tonight would be different. She wouldn't fail again. The observation ridge provided a perfect vantage point of the valley leading to blue sky. Through her night vision scope, Morgan could see the facility's perimeter lights glowing in the distance, while the surrounding mountains created natural channels that any approaching force would have to navigate. Perfect ambush terrain. Morgan settled into a shooting position that her body remembered even if her conscious mind had tried to forget. The medication was wearing off, the tremor in her left hand becoming more pronounced. But once she pressed the stock against her shoulder and wrapped her fingers around the foregrip, the shaking subsided. Some things were burned too deeply into muscle memory to be erased by trauma. Donovan had set up a compact communications center 20 meters back from her position, giving her the solitude she needed to enter what her old unit had called the zone, that mental state where external distractions faded away, leaving only the mission parameters and environmental variables. Through her earpiece, she could hear Delta Team's communications as they approached the blue sky perimeter. Wilson's voice was clear and professional, and all traces of his earlier arrogance replaced by tactical precision. Echo 6 approaching checkpoint Alpha. No sign of hostile activity. Proceeding to phase line Bravo. Morgan's eyes narrowed as she scanned the ridgelines surrounding Delta's position. Something wasn't right. The valley was too quiet. No wildlife movements, no natural ambient sounds. She switched her scope to thermal imaging, and that's when she saw them, heat signatures carefully concealed among the rocks. At least 15 hostiles in elevated positions with clear lines of fire on Delta's approach route. "Contact Donovan," she whispered into her throat mic. "Tell Reynolds to abort the mission. Confirmed hostile presence, multiple positions overlooking the primary infiltration route." She heard Donovan's urgent transmission to base, then Reynolds' voice attempting to reach Delta Team. But she already knew what would happen next. "Signals being jammed," Donovan confirmed. "They can't hear the recall order." Morgan watched through her scope as Delta Team continued their advance, unaware of the trap closing around them. The hostiles remained disciplined, holding their positions, waiting for the perfect moment when the entire team would be exposed in the kill zone. This wasn't a domestic extremist group. The positioning, the discipline, the sophisticated electronic warfare, this was professional military training, the same pattern she'd seen in Afghanistan. "They're walking into exactly the same trap," she said, anger coloring her normally controlled voice. She had seconds to make a decision. If she fired now, she'd reveal her position, but might give Delta enough warning to seek cover. If she waited hoping for a better solution, they'd be caught in the open when the ambush was sprung. The decision crystallized in the space between heartbeats. The Chaytak roared its report, shattering the mountain silence. Morgan's first shot wasn't aimed at any of the hostiles, but at a rock formation directly in front of Delta Team, a warning shot that couldn't be misinterpreted. The effect was immediate. Wilson signaled his team to take cover just as the night erupted with gunfire from the surrounding ridges. What should have been a perfect ambush devolved into a chaotic firefight, with Delta scrambling for whatever protection the terrain offered. Echo 6 under fire, multiple positions. Wilson's voice cut through the jamming attempts on an emergency frequency. "Taking casualties, no visual on shooters." Morgan shifted her aim to the nearest machine gun position, her crosshairs settling on the gunner's chest. The distance was extreme, 2 to 147 meters, with variable crosswinds and significant elevation difference. A shot that less than a dozen people in the world could make consistently. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow. The tremor in her hand disappeared completely as she entered the zone, that state where mathematics and instinct merged into perfect clarity. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, the sound echoing across the valley. Through her scope, she watched the machine gunner collapse his weapon, falling silent. "What the hell was that?" Wilson's voice crackled through the radio as the enemy fire suddenly became erratic. Morgan was already shifting position, moving 10 meters to her right to avoid counter-sniper fire. Her second shot came 40 seconds later, disabling another machine gun position that had been pinning down half of Delta Team. "Morgan, you've got movement on your 3 o'clock, Donovan warned through her earpiece. "They're trying to flank your position." She acknowledged with a single click of her transmitter, already calculating her next move. This wasn't just about saving Delta Team anymore. Whoever had set this trap had used the same playbook as the one that killed her team. This was her chance to find answers, to discover who had betrayed Unit Phantom. The battlefield's rhythm changed as Morgan worked her craft with methodical precision. Each shot was chosen not just for its immediate tactical effect, but for its psychological impact on the enemy. She wounded when killing would have been easier, disabled equipment instead of operators when it served her purpose better, created the impression of multiple shooters by varying her target selection. Delta Team began to rally under Wilson's direction using the confusion Morgan had created to establish a defensive perimeter. Two operators were down, but being treated by the team medic. Echo 6, this is base, Reynolds' voice finally broke through the jamming. Status report. Two wounded, non-critical, Wilson responded. Pinned down by superior forces. Request immediate extraction. Negative on immediate extraction, Reynolds replied. Nearest QRF is 30 minutes out. Hold position. Morgan knew Delta wouldn't last 30 minutes. The enemy force was too large, too well-equipped, and despite her intervention still held the tactical advantage of higher ground. She switched to the emergency frequency. Echo 6, this is Nighthawk. You've got a secondary hostile force moving to cut off your eastern exit. Recommend immediate withdrawal through the northwest ravine. I'll provide covering fire. There was a moment of stunned silence before Wilson responded. Who is this? Identify yourself and authentication code. No time, Morgan replied. Check your 3 o'clock 400 meters. You'll see a group of 15 plus hostiles moving to block your escape route. Through her scope, she watched Wilson raise his tactical binoculars toward the indicated position. His body language shifted immediately as he confirmed the approaching threat. Echo 6 moving northwest, he finally acknowledged. Keep those bastards off us. Morgan didn't waste time with a reply. Her rifle was already acquiring the lead hostile from the flanking group, a man carrying what looked like a sophisticated radio direction finder, the kind used to locate enemy transmissions. They weren't just trying to kill Delta, they were hunting for her. The shot dropped the man instantly. His equipment clattered to the ground, momentarily disrupting the flanking team's coordination. Donovan, she said into her mic, I need you to broadcast on all frequencies. Random bursts, maximum power. Give them multiple signals to chase. Copy that, he replied. But they'll triangulate on our position eventually. I just need to buy Delta enough time to reach the extraction point, Morgan said, already lining up her next shot. What followed was 15 minutes of the most precise covering fire ever witnessed in modern warfare. As Delta fought their way toward the ravine that might offer escape, Morgan systematically eliminated threats before they could bring effective fire on the retreating operators. One by one, hostiles who raised weapons toward Delta found themselves wounded or killed by shots that seemed to materialize from the darkness itself. Equipment malfunctioned at precisely the right moments. Fighters who tried to organize pursuit found themselves pinned down by uncannily accurate fire. To Delta, it must have seemed like divine intervention, as though some guardian angel had spread protective wings over their desperate escape. They couldn't know that their salvation came from a 42-year-old woman with damaged hearing and a trembling hand who'd found a path to redemption through the precision alignment of breath aim and trigger pull. As Delta neared the extraction point, Morgan detected a new threat through her thermal scope. A separate hostile team was deploying from vehicles hidden in a canyon 2 kilometers south, reinforcements arriving far too quickly to be coincidence. They knew, she whispered. They knew someone would be watching. This wasn't just an ambush of Delta. It was a complex operation designed to draw out anyone who might interfere, anyone who might be connected to Unit Phantom. Morgan keyed her radio one last time. Echo 6 Nighthawk, you've got enemy QRF deploying to your extraction point. Alternative LZ at grid coordinates 457982. Move now. Who are you? Wilson demanded. How do you know our extraction protocols? Someone who doesn't want to see another team die, Morgan replied. Now move. You have 8 minutes before they secure the primary LZ. She switched channels. Donovan, pack up. We need to move. What about you? His voice carried uncharacteristic concern. I'll draw them off. Give you and Delta clean exfil. Morgan was already collecting her brass, leaving no evidence of her position. Negative. We go together or not at all. Morgan allowed herself a ghost of a smile. Frank, they're hunting for phantom survivors. This is my chance to find out who betrayed us. I need you to get back to base and make sure Delta delivers their after-action report directly to Reynolds. No one else. There was a long pause before Donovan responded. Acknowledged, but you check in every 30 minutes or I'm coming back for you. Copy that, old man. Morgan said, the hint of warmth in her voice surprising even her. Now go. As Donovan retreated with the communications equipment, Morgan prepared for her next move. She fired 3 more shots in rapid succession, deliberately allowing her muzzle flash to be visible to the searching enemy forces. Through her scope, she watched them adjust their search pattern, converging on her position, with the excitement of hunters who believed their prey was cornered. What they couldn't know was that Morgan Sullivan had spent 2 years mentally mapping every trail, every cave, every escape route in these mountains. While her official job was maintaining weapons, her real work had been preparing for exactly this scenario, a fighting withdrawal through terrain she knew better than the men who had lived there all their lives. As the first hostile fighters reached the ridge 200 meters from her position, Morgan was already gone, having left behind the Che-Tak with its 3 carved notches. A warrior's farewell to the weapon that had served its final purpose. In its place, she'd left something far more valuable, a small radio receiver rigged to her remaining ammunition. When the hostiles found her position, they would find not a trapped American sniper, but a nasty surprise that would further convince them she was something more than human. Morgan moved silently through the darkness, her damaged ear and trembling hand limitations she'd learned to work around through years of adaptation. Her pack contained only essentials, a modified M4 carbine, with suppressor, her tactical tablet, a medical kit, water, and high-calorie ration bars. Everything else had been left behind to increase mobility. The night wrapped around her like a cloak as she navigated by memory and touch, avoiding the predictable paths that the hostiles would expect her to take. Instead, she used game trails and ancient logging roads that appeared on no modern maps knowledge, gleaned from months studying local hunter movements and historical survey patterns. Behind her, a massive explosion lit up the mountainside as the hostiles triggered her trap. The booby-trapped ammunition cache would create the impression of a desperate last stand, while sowing further confusion about exactly what they were dealing with. For the next hour, Morgan led her pursuers on a deadly game of cat and mouse through the Montana mountains. She set improvised traps using equipment from her pack, not lethal devices but carefully calculated impediments designed to wound and slow, rather than kill, forcing the enemy to deal with casualties that would drain their resources and morale. Each trap was placed with the precision of a chess master thinking several moves ahead, a tripwire here causing a hostile fighter to tumble down a rocky slope with a broken leg. A flashbang device there temporarily blinding 3 pursuers and sending them stumbling into a ravine. She used the terrain itself as a weapon, luring groups into box canyons where their numbers became a disadvantage, or onto unstable slopes where their movement triggered minor rock slides. These weren't the tactics taught at Fort Bragg, or even the classified techniques of Unit Phantom. These were adaptations born from necessity, a wounded predator's evolution to survive in a world that had taken everything from her. 2 hours into the pursuit, Morgan found what she'd been looking for, a particular rock formation that local hunters avoided due to superstition, but that she knew concealed the entrance to an abandoned mining tunnel. The narrow opening would force her pursuers to enter single file, neutralizing their numerical advantage. Inside, the temperature dropped dramatically. The limestone walls still bore faint markings from miners who had worked this claim a century before. Morgan moved deeper into the darkness, her night vision revealing a complex network of tunnels. She'd explored this system during daylight reconnaissance missions disguised as off-duty hikes, another secret activity hidden beneath her unassuming role as an armory technician. The pursuing hostile force, now reduced by injuries and fatigue, hesitated at the cave entrance. Their commander's voice echoed through the canyon, picked up by Morgan's directional microphone. "She wants us to follow her in there," he said in accented English. "It's a trap," another voice responded, tense with frustration. "Command wants her alive, if possible. They say she may have intelligence about Operation Chimera." Operation Chimera. Morgan froze at the mention of the code name. She'd seen it once before in intelligence reports just before the Raven Valley disaster that killed her team. "Set charges at the entrance," the commander ordered. "If she won't come out, we'll bury her alive." Morgan smiled grimly in the darkness. They had fallen into her final trap, wasting time and explosives on an entrance, while she was already moving toward one of 3 alternative exits she'd mapped months ago. By the time they realized their mistake, she would be miles away, using the cave system's natural ventilation tunnels to emerge on the far side of the mountain ridge. As she navigated the ancient passageways, Morgan's tactical tablet vibrated with an incoming transmission. She hesitated, then checked the screen. It was a secure satellite feed showing a helicopter touching down at the alternative extraction point. Delta had made it. All 8 operators were loading aboard alive, if not unscathed. A weight lifted from her shoulders. Her mission, her self-assigned redemption, was complete. Those 8 young men would go home, would have futures, would not be added to the memorial wall that haunted her dreams. Whatever happened to her now was immaterial compared to that success. The tablet vibrated again. This time it was an intercept from the hostile communication network, automatically translated by her custom software. What she read stopped her mid-step. Command confirms target identity. Morgan Sullivan, former Unit Phantom. High-value capture. American collaborator will pay triple for her alive. American collaborator. The words burned into her consciousness like acid. Not just any intelligence leak, but an American deliberately feeding information to hostiles. The same pattern that had led her team into a trap 5 years ago that had resulted in the deaths of her teammates. This wasn't just about saving Delta anymore. This was about uncovering a traitor who had been selling American lives for years. Morgan altered her plans immediately. Instead of using the eastern exit as she'd intended, she would take the more dangerous northern passage, one that led directly to a valley where she suspected the hostiles maintained a forward operating base. If there was evidence of American involvement, it would be there where the hostile leadership felt secure enough to maintain records and communication equipment. The passageway narrowed as it angled upward, forcing Morgan to remove her pack and push it ahead of her through a limestone squeeze. Her left hand seized with pain as she pulled herself through the constriction, old injuries protesting the abuse. The nerve medication was wearing off the tremor, returning with greater intensity. The final section required a near vertical climb up a natural chimney in the rock with minimal handholds and the constant danger of falling stone. In her prime, Morgan would have ascended it without hesitation. Now, with damaged nerves and compromised hearing affecting her balance, it took every ounce of determination to reach the top. She emerged into the pre-dawn glow of the Montana mountains, the first hints of light touching the eastern peaks. The air was thin at this altitude, crystalline and sharp in her lungs. Below her, the valley where Delta had nearly died was now peaceful, the sounds of battle replaced by the eternal silence of the high country. Morgan oriented herself, quickly identifying landmarks she'd memorized from satellite imagery. The hostile base should be less than 2 kilometers north, concealed beneath a natural overhang that would shield it from aerial observation. Moving with the caution of a hunter in hostile territory, Morgan approached from downwind using natural terrain features for concealment. Her M4 was at the ready, though she hoped to avoid further engagement. Her mission now was intelligence gathering, not combat. The base appeared exactly as expected, a collection of temporary structures with a sophisticated communications array, carefully camouflaged from overhead surveillance. But subtle details confirmed her suspicions. The ground around the entrance was compacted from heavy foot traffic, and thermal signatures indicated recent vehicle movement. Morgan circled the facility twice, identifying tripwires and primitive but effective alarm systems. With patience born from years of high-stakes operations, she systematically disabled each security measure, creating a path to the entrance that wouldn't alert anyone inside. The main door was unlocked, a final deception, suggesting there was nothing of value within. Morgan entered in a low crouch, her M4 sweeping the apparently empty interior. The space was sparsely furnished with military-grade equipment, communications gear, weapons racks, and supply crates. To an untrained observer, it might appear to be a standard forward operating base for a well-equipped paramilitary group. But Morgan's experienced eye immediately noted the irregularities: American-made tactical equipment with serial numbers removed, military-grade encryption devices, and most damning of all, a desk in the center of the room with an open laptop and a stack of documents bearing U.S. government seals. Morgan moved to the desk, her pulse quickening as she examined the materials. Operation plans, patrol routes, identification protocols, the kind of intelligence that would allow hostile forces to predict American movements with deadly accuracy. The exact pattern she'd observed before her team was ambushed 5 years ago and again with Delta. She powered on the laptop, which surprisingly had no password protection. The screen illuminated to reveal an email client with messages in both English and encrypted text. Morgan scrolled quickly, her blood running cold, as she read communications between hostile leadership and someone using an encrypted signature, but clearly American based on language patterns and references. One name appeared repeatedly in the communications Operation Chimera. Morgan connected her tactical tablet to the laptop, initiating a complete data transfer. Whatever Operation Chimera was, it represented a betrayal at the highest levels, American intelligence being deliberately fed to enemies, resulting in the deaths of U.S. personnel. As the transfer progressed, Morgan photographed the physical documents with her tablet, creating a comprehensive record of the evidence. This wasn't just about her personal redemption anymore. This was about exposing a cancer within the system she had served for over 2 decades. The data transfer completed just as Morgan's enhanced hearing picked up sounds from outside footsteps approaching the base. Someone was coming. Multiple someones based on the varied footfall patterns. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they discovered the disabled security measures and raised an alarm. Morgan disconnected her tablet and quickly restored the laptop to its previous state. The physical documents were returned to their exact positions, leaving no evidence of her presence. She had what she needed. Now she just had to escape with it. But as she turned to leave, a final document caught her eye, a personnel file with a familiar name, Reynolds James A. Colonel, U.S. Army. Morgan froze her mind, refusing to process the implication. Colonel Reynolds, the man who had shown her respect when others mocked her, who had recognized her capabilities, who had tacitly approved her monitoring of Delta's mission, listed as a primary contact for Operation Chimera. The betrayal hit Morgan like a physical blow. Not just any American collaborator, but someone she had begun to trust, someone who had access to every aspect of operations at Fort Granite. It explained how the hostiles had such perfect intelligence, how they always seemed one step ahead of American forces. She took a final photograph of the document, then moved quickly back to the exit. The voices outside were clearer now. Hostile fighters returning from the failed pursuit. Morgan slipped out through a rear emergency exit, using the morning shadows for concealment, and began her withdrawal through a dried stream bed that offered cover while minimizing footprints. The intelligence she'd gathered was too important to risk in direct combat. She needed to find a secure transmission point to upload the data to trusted contacts outside the immediate chain of command. But with Reynolds' involvement confirmed, she couldn't risk using any official channels connected to Fort Granite. There was only one person she could trust now, the old ghost who had maintained her equipment and kept her secrets. The man who had seen through her cover from the beginning. As she moved through the Montana wilderness toward a ridgeline where satellite coverage would be optimal, Morgan's mind raced with implications. If Reynolds was Chimera, how deep did the conspiracy go? How many other Americans had been compromised? And most importantly, who had originally betrayed Unit Phantom in Afghanistan? The answers were in the data she carried, hidden among the communications and operational plans. She just needed time to analyze it, to find the patterns that would reveal the full scope of the betrayal. The morning sun climbed higher, eliminating the advantage of her night vision equipment. Morgan adjusted her movement pattern accordingly, using terrain features for concealment and traveling only when natural sounds whined through the valleys. Birds startling from cover would mask any noise she might make. By mid-morning, she reached a transmission point, a rocky outcropping with clear lines of sight in all directions, ensuring she couldn't be approached without warning. Morgan set up her tablet's satellite antenna and began the complex process of establishing a secure connection. The transmission would include everything: the evidence of Operation Chimera, Reynolds' involvement, the hostile facility, and her own detailed analysis connecting these new findings to the ambush patterns she'd observed over 5 years. But she wouldn't send it to Fort Granite or any official military channel. Instead, she'd route it through a series of proxies to the one person who might still be untouched by Chimera's corruption, Master Sergeant Frank Donovan. As the transmission completed, Morgan knew she had crossed a point of no return. If the hostiles didn't kill her, her own side might, or at least those compromise elements that were part of Operation Chimera. She was now truly a ghost, operating outside all official structures with enemies on all sides. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt something like peace. Delta Team was safe. The evidence was transmitted. And the system that had failed her team would be forced to acknowledge its rot. Morgan disassembled her transmission equipment and buried it beneath a cairn of rocks, a location she could return to if needed, but nothing that would immediately identify her presence to searching eyes. Then she shouldered her pack and continued moving, putting distance between herself and the hostile base, before they discovered their security breach. As she moved through the wilderness, a strange sense of freedom began to settle over her. For 5 years, she had existed in a twilight state, officially dead, functionally invisible, emotionally hollow. Now she had purpose again, a mission that transcended personal survival or even revenge. Somewhere in the mountains behind her, hostile forces were still searching. Ahead, the corrupted elements of her own government would soon realize their operation was compromised. She was trapped between two enemies, injured, under-equipped, and alone. But for the first time since Raven Valley, Morgan Sullivan was truly alive. The ghost had found her purpose in the shadows. Dawn broke over the Montana mountains, painting the ridgelines in crimson and gold. For the men of Delta Force, that beautiful sunrise might be their last. Lieutenant Michael Wilson, pressed against a jagged outcropping, barely large enough to shield his frame, watched in helpless rage as his team's position deteriorated by the second. Two of his snipers lay motionless, taken out in the opening volley. The rest of his men were scattered across exposed terrain, pinned down by interlocking fields of fire from positions they couldn't even see. This was no domestic extremist group. The precision, the discipline, the sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, this was professional military training at its highest level. Wilson had walked his team directly into a perfect ambush. Echo 6 to base, we are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. 2 men down, request immediate air support. His voice remained steady despite the chaos erupting around him, but the only response was the persistent crackle of electronic jamming. From her observation point 2 kilometers away, Morgan Sullivan watched the ambush unfold with cold calculation. Through her specialized thermal optics, she could see what Delta couldn't: the precise positioning of enemy forces, their advanced equipment, the secondary teams moving to cut off escape routes. The attackers wore no identifying uniforms or insignia, but their movements betrayed extensive tactical training. Same pattern, she whispered to herself, identical to Raven Valley. The enemy had established 3 overlapping fields of fire using PKM machine guns mounted on specially designed low-profile tripods that minimized heat signatures. Their forward observers carried Pfeffler thermal imaging systems more advanced than standard military issue. Even their communications discipline, minimal radio traffic reliance on hand signals, spoke of elite training. Morgan's tactical assessment was automatic, her mind processing terrain features, weapons capabilities, and environmental factors with machine-like precision. Range to primary machine gun 2, 147 meters. Windage 12 mph crosswind from west, gusting to 15. Temperature 42 degrees. Humidity 57%. Barometric pressure 24.85 nhg. Elevation difference 317 meters. Factors that would make such a shot impossible for most marksmen, but merely challenging for Morgan. Her left hand trembled slightly as she steadied her rifle against the natural rock formation she'd selected as her hide. The early morning chill had intensified her nerve damage, and the medication was wearing off. But when she settled into position, muscle memory overrode physical limitations. The tremor vanished as she established her natural point of aim. Through the scope, she watched Wilson attempting to coordinate his team's defense. Despite his earlier arrogance, he was proving himself a capable leader under fire, keeping his men calm, establishing sectors of fire, making the most of their deteriorating situation. Morgan made her decision. The Shatters M200 came alive in her hands, the barrel tracking smoothly as she acquired her first target, not the machine gunners themselves, but their communications hub. A sophisticated signal relay visible only through thermal imaging, concealed under a camouflage tarp 800 meters from her position. The rifle's report shattered the morning stillness, the sound rolling across the valley like distant thunder. Through her scope, Morgan watched the communications relay disintegrate, components scattering in a satisfying spray of debris. Effect immediate, the enemy's coordinated fire patterns faltered as their centralized command and control evaporated. What the hell was that? Wilson's voice suddenly clear on the emergency frequency now that the jamming was disrupted. Morgan was already shifting position, moving 10 meters laterally to avoid counter-sniper fire, another lesson from Donovan. Never fire twice from the same spot, no matter how secure you think you are. Her second shot came 30 seconds later, the crosshairs settling on the primary machine gun position that had Delta's right flank pinned down. The bullet traveled 147 meters through variable mountain air currents, striking with surgical precision. Not a kill shot, Morgan aimed for the weapon's feed tray, rendering the machine gun inoperable in a shower of bent metal and scattered ammunition. The enemy's fire superiority immediately diminished, creating a brief window of opportunity for Delta. "Whoever you are," Wilson's voice came through her earpiece, "we could use some more of that." Morgan allowed herself the ghost of a smile as she continued her methodical disruption of the enemy force. Each shot was calculated not just for immediate tactical effect, but for psychological impact. She targeted weapons rather than operators when possible, equipment rather than personnel, creating an impression of a larger force through selective precision fire. Military psychologists called it force multiplication through uncertainty, making the enemy believe they faced a more substantial threat than reality, causing hesitation and defensive posturing rather than aggressive action. Through her scope, Morgan watched the enemy commander attempting to rally his disoriented forces. He remained in covered position, but his arm movements betrayed his location and functioned to Morgan's experienced eye. The range was extreme, 212 meters with variable crosswinds, but the target was clear. The Shatters spoke again. The commander collapsed mid-gesture. Without centralized leadership, the ambush devolved into individual tactical decisions, some fighters pressing the attack, others seeking cover from the unseen sniper. The coordinated trap had transformed into a chaotic firefight. "Delta, this is Nighthawk," Morgan transmitted on the emergency frequency. "You have a 30-second window to reposition to the rock formation 50 meters northwest of your current position. Better cover elevated sightlines. Move now." She provided covering fire as Wilson coordinated his team's movement, picking off any enemy fighter who attempted to engage the exposed operators during their dash to better position. "Who is this?" Wilson demanded once his team had reached relative safety. "Identify yourself and authentication code." "No time for that," Morgan replied, already tracking a new threat through her scope. "You've got a second enemy element moving to cut off your eastern exfiltration route. 15+ hostiles, heavy weapons." Through her thermal optics, Morgan could see the flanking force moving with practiced discipline through a ravine that would position them perfectly to intercept Delta's most likely escape route. Their heat signatures revealed equipment profiles consistent with Special Operations Forces, compact weapons, advanced optics, specialized gear loadouts. "Wilson, check your 3 o'clock 400 meters," she instructed. "You'll see them crossing the ridgeline." She watched through her scope as Wilson raised his binoculars toward the indicated position, his body language shifting as he confirmed the approaching threat. "Confirmed visual on hostiles." He acknowledged, his voice tighter now. "Echo 6 to base, do you copy? We have multiple hostile forces converging on our position." Only static answered his call. "They're still jamming conventional frequencies," Morgan explained. "This emergency band is using frequency hopping encryption your team's equipment isn't configured to detect. That's why you couldn't hear me earlier." "Sullivan," Wilson's voice registered shock as recognition dawned. "You're Nighthawk." "Questions later," Morgan replied, already lining up her next shot. "You need to move your team northwest through the ravine. There's a secondary extraction point at grid coordinates 457982. I'll cover your withdrawal." As if to emphasize her point, the Chaytak roared again, dropping the point man of the flanking force. Wilson hesitated only momentarily before making his decision. "Echo 6 moving northwest. All elements maintain fire discipline, conserve ammunition. We've got a guardian angel watching our backs." Morgan's earpiece crackled with Donovan's voice on their private channel. "Ghost Eye, this is Eagle 6. I'm in position 2 kilometers south with support package. Shall I deploy?" Morgan's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected Donovan to follow her into the field to risk his career, possibly his life, for an operation that officially didn't exist. "Negative Eagle 6, she replied. "Maintain overwatch position. I need you as our eyes on the southern approach." "Too late," came the gruff response. "Already deployed countermeasures on the eastern ridge. You've got 60 seconds before things get noisy." Before Morgan could protest, a series of explosions erupted along the eastern ridge, improvised devices Donovan must have placed during his approach. The detonations weren't powerful enough to cause significant casualties, but their precise placement created a wall of noise and confusion directly in the path of the flanking force. "Damn it, Frank," Morgan muttered, but she couldn't deny the effectiveness of his intervention. The flanking force scattered their coordinated advance, disrupted by the unexpected explosions. "You're welcome," Donovan's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "Now focus on clearing Delta's exfil route. I'll handle any pursuit from the east." Morgan adjusted her tactical plan accordingly. With Donovan covering the eastern approach, she could concentrate on neutralizing the primary ambush force still engaging Delta. "Wilson," she transmitted, "change of plans? Move directly north through the ravine. You've got clear passage for the next 200 meters. After that, bear northwest toward the extraction coordinates." "Copy that," Wilson acknowledged. Moving north. Through her scope, Morgan watched Delta execute a textbook fighting withdrawal two-man teams providing covering fire, while others moved leapfrogging positions with disciplined precision. Despite his earlier arrogance, Wilson was proving himself a capable tactical leader under pressure. Morgan continued her methodical disruption of the enemy force, each shot selected for maximum psychological impact. She targeted communications equipment, weapon systems, and occasionally, when necessary, personnel, always with surgical precision designed to wound rather than kill when possible. The enemy, faced with an unseen sniper who seemed able to strike from impossible distances, grew increasingly hesitant. Their earlier aggression gave way to defensive posturing, buying precious time for Delta's escape. Morgan Donovan's voice had lost its earlier satisfaction. "We've got movement from the south, vehicles approaching fast. Looks like reinforcements." She swung her scope toward the southern approach, confirming Donovan's warning. Three unmarked SUVs were moving rapidly up the access road, their heat signatures indicating heavily armed personnel. "How fast can Delta reach the extraction point?" Donovan asked. Morgan calculated quickly. "At their current pace, 7 minutes minimum." "Those vehicles will reach the valley floor in less than 5, Donovan countered. "They'll intercept before extraction." Morgan weighed her options. Delta was moving well, but not fast enough to outpace the approaching reinforcements. If the enemy vehicles reached the valley floor before Delta cleared the area, the team would be caught in open terrain with minimal cover. "I'll delay them," she decided. "You maintain overwatch on Delta. Make sure they reach extraction." "Negative," Donovan replied immediately. "Those vehicles are coming in hot. Heavy weapons professional operators. You can't engage that force alone." "I don't need to defeat them," Morgan explained, already collecting her gear. "Just slow them down." She left the Chaytak in position. The long-range precision rifle would be a liability in the close-quarters engagement she was planning. Instead, she unslung her modified M4 carbine, checking its suppressor and confirming a full magazine of subsonic ammunition. "Frank," she said, using his first name deliberately, "if I don't make it back, make sure the intel gets to someone you trust, not Reynolds. No one at Fort Granite." "What are you talking about?" Donovan's voice sharpened. "Reynolds is compromised," Morgan said flatly. "I found his name in enemy documentation. He's part of Operation Chimera." The silence that followed spoke volumes. "I'll cover Delta," Donovan finally said. "You do what you need to do, but Morgan, you check in every 30 minutes or I'm coming after you." "Copy that, old man," she replied, allowing a rare warmth to color her voice. "Now get our boys home." Morgan moved with practiced efficiency down the eastern slope of her observation point, using natural terrain features to mask her approach toward the access road. Her damaged ear and trembling hand were limitations she'd learned to work around through thousands of hours of adaptation. Where her hearing failed on the left side, she compensated with heightened awareness on her right. Where her hand trembled, she adjusted her grip and firing stance. The approaching vehicles had slowed at the valley entrance, their drivers navigating the rough terrain with caution. Morgan used their reduced speed to her advantage, reaching a position overlooking a narrow section of road where the vehicles would be forced to pass single file. Perfect ambush terrain, a realization that triggered a momentary flash of bitter irony. She was setting the same kind of trap that had killed her team in Raven Valley. From her pack, Morgan retrieved 3 improvised devices, not explosives, but specialized electronics designed to disable vehicle systems through targeted electromagnetic pulses. Another skill learned from her time with Unit Phantom, adapted for operations where minimal casualties were preferred. She placed the devices at strategic points along the roadside, concealing them beneath rocks and vegetation, then moved to an elevated position 50 meters away with clear lines of sight to the approach. The first vehicle appeared around the bend, an armored Suburban with tinted windows and reinforced chassis, standard transportation for private military contractors operating in high-threat environments. Through her thermal scope, Morgan could see 5 heat signatures inside, plus a sixth manning what appeared to be a mounted weapon system in the rear compartment. Not domestic extremists, professional operators. As the lead vehicle reached the center of her prepared zone, Morgan activated the first device remotely. The effect was immediate. The vehicle's electronics failed catastrophically, bringing it to an abrupt halt and plunging its interior into darkness as all systems shut down. The second and third vehicles braked hard to avoid collision, exactly as Morgan had anticipated. Their personnel immediately deployed in textbook counter-ambush formation, taking cover behind vehicle doors and scanning the surrounding terrain for threats. Morgan observed their movements carefully, noting their equipment, their tactical positioning, their discipline under pressure. These weren't random mercenaries. They were trained professionals executing established protocols. One operator, clearly the team leader based on how the others oriented toward him, issued hand signals directing a coordinated sweep of the area. His movements were precise, economical, betraying extensive experience. Morgan zoomed her thermal optics, focusing on the team leader's gear. What she saw confirmed her worst suspicions: specialized equipment identical to what Unit Phantom had used, including a distinctive communications rig only issued to elite special operations units. American equipment, American tactics, American operators, but operating against American forces. Morgan captured images of the team through her tactical tablet, documenting their equipment and appearance for later analysis. Then she activated the remaining 2 EMP devices in rapid succession, disabling the other vehicles and sowing further confusion among the enemy force. With the vehicles disabled, the reinforcements would be delayed by at least 20 minutes, more than enough time for Delta to reach extraction. "Donovan," she transmitted on their secure channel, "vehicles neutralized. What's Delta's status?" "2 minutes from extraction point," came the response. "Helicopter inbound. They're going to make it." Relief flooded through Morgan's system, a rare emotional response she quickly suppressed. The mission wasn't complete yet. "I'm going to withdraw before they organize a proper search pattern," she informed Donovan. "Maintain radio silence unless emergency. I'll contact you when secure." "Understood," Donovan acknowledged. "Stay Ghost, Morgan." She moved silently away from her position, using natural terrain features to mask her retreat. Behind her, she could hear the disabled team attempting to restore their vehicles, their voices carrying frustration and confusion. Morgan navigated through the mountain terrain with the instinctive precision of someone who had spent months memorizing every ridge, every ravine, every potential escape route. Her destination was a natural cave system, 6 kilometers northeast, one of several emergency shelters she had prepared during her time at Fort Granite. As she moved, her tactical mind processed the implications of what she had just witnessed. American operators working against American forces, Reynolds' name in enemy documentation, Operation Chimera connecting it all. The pieces were forming a pattern, and that pattern pointed to something far more sinister than a simple intelligence leak. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a coordinated effort to undermine American military effectiveness from within. 2 hours later, Morgan reached the cave entrance, carefully concealed behind a natural rock formation. She performed a meticulous security sweep of the surrounding area before slipping inside her night vision, revealing the austere shelter she had prepared months earlier. The cave contained basic survival supplies, water shelf-stable rations, medical equipment, along with a compact communications system powered by a small solar battery. Morgan activated the system, establishing a secure connection to Donovan's personal emergency frequency. "Eagle 6, this is Ghost Eye. Status report." Donovan's response came through clearly, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Delta extracted successfully. All personnel accounted for. 2 wounded, non-critical. And the pursuit force, still searching the valley," Donovan reported. "They've called in aerial reconnaissance, unmarked drones, civilian configuration, but military-grade sensors." Morgan processed this information grimly. The enemy was committing significant resources to find her further confirmation of the operation's importance. "What's the situation at Fort Granite?" she asked. "Complicated," Donovan replied. "Reynolds is acting like nothing happened. Welcome Delta back personally," debriefed Wilson immediately. But here's the interesting part. The official report already lists the engagement as an encounter with domestic extremists using stolen military equipment. Complete fabrication. Is Wilson going along with it? For now, Donovan said. But he's not convinced. Came to me privately after the debrief asking questions about you. Morgan considered this development. Wilson had seen enough to know the official narrative was false, but not enough to understand the full scope of what they were facing. Did you tell him? Only that you were protecting him and his team, Donovan replied. Nothing about Phantom or Chimera, but he's smart, Morgan. He's going to keep digging. We might need him, Morgan decided, but not yet. First, I need to analyze the data I collected. She connected her tactical tablet to the communications system, transferring encrypted files to Donovan's secure terminal. I'm sending you everything I found at the enemy command post. Communications logs, operational plans, personnel files. Focus on anything related to Operation Chimera or Reynolds. What about you? Donovan asked. What's your next move? Morgan checked the medical wrap around her wrist, adjusting it to address the intensifying tremor in her left hand. I need to find out who's running Chimera. Reynolds is involved, but he's not the mastermind. Someone else is pulling the strings, someone with enough authority to coordinate an operation of this magnitude. You think it goes all the way up the chain? I don't know, Morgan admitted, but I intend to find out. She was about to continue when her surveillance system, a series of motion sensors placed around the cave entrance, triggered a silent alarm. Someone was approaching her position. I've got company, she whispered, going dark. Morgan disconnected the communication system and moved to a defensive position near the cave entrance, her M4 at the ready. Through the narrow opening, she could see a single figure approaching cautiously, not in tactical gear, but moving with the deliberate precision of a trained operator. The figure paused at the invisible perimeter of her sensor network, as if sensing the surveillance. Then, to Morgan's surprise, they raised empty hands in a universal gesture of non-aggression. Ghost Eye, a male voice called softly. I know you are in there. We need to talk. Morgan's finger tightened on the trigger. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. I'm alone, the voice continued. Unarmed. Donovan sent me coordinates. Morgan's jaw tightened. Donovan wouldn't have compromised her position without good reason, but it still represented an unacceptable security risk. Step into the open, she ordered. Slowly, hands visible. The figure complied, moving into a shaft of late afternoon sunlight that revealed his identity. Lieutenant Michael Wilson, still wearing the dust-covered combat fatigues from the morning's engagement. How did you find me? Morgan demanded, not lowering her weapon. Donovan, Wilson confirmed, said you needed to see this immediately. He slowly reached into his chest pocket and extracted a folded document. It's the official after-action report from this morning, already filed and archived. Morgan gestured for him to place the document on a flat rock near the cave entrance, then retreat 3 paces. Once he complied, she emerged cautiously, retrieving the paper while maintaining her weapon's aim. The report was standard military format, but its contents were pure fiction. The entire engagement was described as an encounter with domestic extremists with military experience. The ambush attributed to opportunistic tactics rather than sophisticated planning, and most significantly, no mention of any support from an outside sniper. The operation was classified as a success, with Delta neutralizing the extremist threat in securing the Blue Sky facility. The report was authorized by Colonel James Reynolds with a digital verification code indicating it had already been uploaded to Central Command. This is a complete fabrication, Wilson said, stating the obvious. Reynolds is erasing what actually happened out there. Morgan studied him carefully. The arrogant young officer from the armory had been replaced by something harder, more focused, the transformation that combat often catalyzes in those who survive it. Why bring this to me, she asked. Why not go up the chain of command? Wilson's jaw tightened. Because Reynolds is the chain of command at Fort Granite, and because I saw American equipment on those extremists. Specialized gear that shouldn't be in civilian hands. And their tactics. He shook his head. That wasn't some militia group. That was professional military training. Morgan made her decision. Wilson had seen enough to be useful, and Donovan's willingness to share her location suggested he trusted the lieutenant. Come inside, she said, lowering her weapon slightly. We don't have much time. Inside the cave, Morgan activated a small tactical light, illuminating the sparse interior. Wilson took in the carefully organized equipment, the communication system, the medical supplies laid out with military precision. "You've been planning this for a while," he observed. "Since I arrived at Fort Granite," Morgan confirmed, returning to her tactical tablet. "What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this cave. If you're not prepared for that level of operational security, leave now." Wilson's expression hardened. "Those men tried to kill my team today. I want to know why." Morgan nodded, accepting his answer. She activated her tablet's display, projecting images onto the cave wall photographs of documents from the enemy command post communications logs, personnel files. "This morning wasn't an isolated incident," she explained. "It was part of a coordinated operation called Chimera, designed to systematically eliminate specific American military units under the guise of terrorist attacks or training accidents." Wilson studied the projected images, his tactical mind quickly processing the implications. "Why, what's the objective?" "Control," Morgan said simply. "Someone within our own military structure is eliminating units and commanders who might oppose their agenda, replacing them with loyalists." She swiped to another image, the personnel file that had shocked her earlier. "Colonel James Reynolds is part of it. His designation in Chimera documentation is Avalanche Regional Coordinator for the Northwest Sector." Wilson stared at the evidence, disbelief warring with the tactical reality he had witnessed firsthand. "This is treason on an unprecedented scale." "It gets worse," Morgan continued, displaying intercepted communications logs. "Chimera has been operational for at least 5 years. My team in Afghanistan, Unit Phantom, was one of their first targets." She explained briefly about the Raven Valley operation, the perfect ambush that had killed her teammates, her survival, and subsequent discovery of intelligence pointing to American involvement. "I was officially declared KIA," she concluded. "It gave me the opportunity to investigate Chimera from the shadows, eventually leading me to Fort Granite." Wilson absorbed this information with growing tension evident in his posture. So Reynolds brought Delta into a kill box deliberately. But why we're just a tactical unit? What threat do we pose to this Chimera operation? Morgan projected another document, a Chimera operational directive dated 3 weeks earlier. "You weren't the primary target, I was." The directive detailed intelligence suggesting that a former Unit Phantom operative had survived and was tracking Chimera operations. It ordered surveillance of all military facilities where this ghost might attempt to gather intelligence. They suspected someone was investigating them, but they didn't know who, Morgan explained. So they created an irresistible scenario, a Delta Force team walking into the same kind of ambush that killed my unit. They knew if I was watching, I wouldn't be able to stand by and let it happen again. "We were bait," Wilson realized, anger darkening his features. "And I took it," Morgan acknowledged. "But in doing so, I confirmed their suspicions. Now they know for certain that a Phantom survivor is active, and they'll commit significant resources to hunting me down." "So what's our next move?" Wilson asked, automatically shifting to a collaborative tactical mindset. Morgan raised an eyebrow at his presumption, but didn't correct him. She might need his help, especially now that Reynolds would be watching Donovan closely. "First, we need to identify who's running Chimera," she said. "Reynolds is Avalanche, a regional coordinator. But the operation documentation references someone called Management, the overall commander." She projected another document, a partial organizational chart showing regional coordinators reporting to this mysterious management figure whose identity was protected by multiple layers of encryption. Whoever management is, they have the authority to redirect military assets, falsify official reports, and eliminate special operations units without triggering investigations. Morgan continued, "That suggests someone very high in the chain of command." Wilson studied the organizational chart intently. These regional designations match Unified Combatant Command sectors. That's Pentagon-level organization. Morgan nodded, impressed despite herself by his analytical insight. Exactly. Chimera is structured to mirror legitimate military command architecture, making it nearly invisible within existing protocols. She swiped to another document, a communications log between Reynolds and an encrypted recipient. "According to this, management is planning to visit Fort Granite personally in 3 days to assess the Nighthawk situation. That's our opportunity to identify them." "And then what?" Wilson asked. "Even with proof, who do we report this to? If Chimera has penetrated to Pentagon level, who can we trust?" It was the question that had haunted Morgan for 5 years, the reason she had operated alone, trusting no one except Donovan. I have one contact, she said carefully. Someone outside the normal chain of command with direct access to the Joint Chiefs. If we can get concrete proof of management's identity, we might have a chance. Her surveillance system triggered another silent alarm, multiple contacts approaching from the southwest. We've got company, Morgan warned, immediately shutting down her equipment. At least 6 individuals' tactical movement pattern. Wilson's hand moved to his sidearm, but Morgan shook her head. Too many. We need to evacuate. She quickly gathered essential equipment, her tablet communications gear, medical supplies, while Wilson moved to the cave entrance, assessing the approaching threat. They're using a standard search pattern, he reported. Professional, thermal imaging equipment. They'll detect the cave's heat signature soon. Morgan nodded, already implementing her evacuation plan. She activated a small device near the cave's rear wall, revealing a narrow passage concealed behind a natural rock formation. Secondary exit, she explained, leads to a ravine half a kilometer east. We can use the terrain to break their pursuit pattern. Wilson looked impressed. You really did plan for everything. When everyone thinks you're dead, you develop a healthy appreciation for escape routes, Morgan replied dryly. Now move, and stay close. As they slipped into the hidden passage, Morgan activated one final system, a small thermal decoy designed to create multiple heat signatures within the cave, confusing enemy sensors and buying precious time for their escape. The passage was narrow, requiring them to move in single file through near total darkness. Morgan led the way, her night vision goggles revealing the treacherous terrain. Behind her, Wilson followed with remarkable stealth for someone without specialized infiltration training. They emerged into a steep ravine just as the sun dipped below the western mountains, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Morgan immediately oriented herself, identifying the optimal escape route based on terrain features and probable enemy search patterns. We need to reach the eastern ridge before full dark, she instructed. I have another shelter prepared there. Wilson nodded, following her lead without question, a notable change from their first encounter in the armory. As they moved through the gathering darkness, Morgan's tactical mind continued processing the implications of the day's events. Delta had survived the ambush. She had acquired critical intelligence about Operation Chimera. But Reynolds now knew she was alive and actively working against them. The game had changed. She was no longer a ghost observing from the shadows. She was a confirmed threat that Chimera would commit significant resources to eliminate. And in 3 days, the architect of the entire operation, the mysterious management, would be within her reach at Fort Granite. The hunter had become the hunted. But Morgan Sullivan had spent 5 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Let them come. The abandoned radar station stood like a sentinel atop the rocky outcropping in the Bitterroot National Forest, its massive dish silhouetted against the Montana sky. Once cutting-edge technology during the Cold War designed to detect Soviet bombers that never came, it had been decommissioned decades ago and forgotten by all but a few government archivists. For 3 months, this relic of another era had served as Morgan Sullivan's sanctuary and command center. Where military engineers had once tracked phantom radar signatures, a real ghost now monitored a different kind of invisible threat. The interior of the facility bore little resemblance to its original state. Morgan had transformed the underground control room into a sophisticated intelligence hub, salvaging equipment from abandoned military caches and modifying civilian technology to serve her purposes. The true value of the facility lay in its line of sight to Fort Granite and the dish itself, which provided an ideal platform for intercepting communications. Master Sergeant Frank Donovan navigated the treacherous mountain path with the practiced ease of a man who had spent decades in unforgiving terrain. At 63, his body bore the accumulated wear of a lifetime of service, but his movements remained precise, deliberate, conserving energy with the efficiency that only experience could teach. He carried a weathered backpack containing supplies, food, ammunition, medical supplies, and, most importantly, intelligence. The kind that couldn't be transmitted electronically, not with Chimera's sophisticated monitoring system scanning every frequency. Morgan met him at the concealed entrance, her M4 carbine held casually but ready. Even with Donovan, caution had become second nature. Clear, she asked, her voice low. Donovan nodded. Took the long route, 3 switchbacks, 2 false trails. If anyone's following, they're better than I've ever seen. Inside the facility, Morgan secured the entrance while Donovan unpacked his supplies. The underground chamber was Spartan but functional, a tactical operations center stripped to essential elements. Multiple screens displayed intercepted data streams, some from Fort Granite, others from satellite transmissions that passed overhead. "You look like hell," Donovan observed, noting the dark circles beneath Morgan's eyes and the increased tremor in her left hand. "Sleep is overrated," she replied, accepting a thermos of coffee from his pack. "What's the situation at Fort Granite?" Donovan's expression darkened. "Reynolds disappeared 2 weeks ago. Official word says he's on a special assignment to the Pentagon. No one's heard from him since." Morgan processed this information with a frown. Reynolds' vanishing wasn't part of the expected pattern. As Avalanche, he was a key regional coordinator for Chimera. His sudden absence suggested a significant shift in the operation. "There's more," Donovan continued. "New commander arrived 3 days after Reynolds left. Colonel William Grant, career intelligence officer, came out of nowhere with direct Pentagon authorization. Chimera replacing their compromised asset," Morgan concluded. "That's what I thought at first," Donovan agreed. "But Grant's been making changes that don't fit the pattern. Replacing key personnel, upgrading security protocols, installing new surveillance systems that aren't on any official requisition." Morgan's attention sharpened. "What kind of surveillance?" "Advanced signal intelligence. Directional microphones, thermal imaging arrays, RF detection systems. The kind of setup you'd use to hunt someone with specialized communications equipment." "They're looking for me," Morgan said flatly. "With everything they've got," Donovan confirmed. "But here's the interesting part. Grant's especially interested in the mysterious sniper who saved Delta. Has Wilson and his team giving daily briefings on what they remember, analyzing your shooting patterns, trying to build a profile." Morgan moved to one of her monitoring stations, reviewing the data feeds from Fort Granite. "Have they identified me?" "Not officially. Wilson's playing dumb, feeding them generalities. But Grant's not buying it. He knows there's more to the story." Donovan hesitated, then delivered his most significant piece of intelligence. "Grant's bringing in a specialist to consult on the investigation. Arriving tomorrow." He met Morgan's eyes with grim significance. "Colonel Thomas Westfield." The name hit Morgan like a physical blow. "Westfield? You're certain?" "Saw the transport authorization myself. Top-level clearance, minimal documentation." Morgan's mind raced as the implications crystallized. Thomas Westfield, her former commanding officer in Unit Phantom, the man who had recruited her, trained her, shaped her into the operator she had become. And if her suspicions were correct, the architect of Operation Chimera itself. "This changes everything," she said, moving to her tactical planning board. "Westfield wouldn't come himself unless he knows you're alive," Donovan finished. "And close." Morgan nodded, the pieces falling into place. "He's not just coming to consult. He's coming to finish what he started in Raven Valley." "There's something else you should know," Donovan said. "Wilson's been promoted. He's running the sniper training program now, completely revamped the curriculum. Kid's turned into quite the leader." A hint of a smile touched Morgan's lips. "Combat does that to the right people. Strips away the bullshit." "He asks about you. Not directly, but he's been spending time with the older instructors, learning traditional techniques that aren't in the modern manuals. Gulf War era skills, the kind you used that day." Morgan absorbed this information without comment, but inwardly acknowledged the significance. Wilson had seen what she could do, had experienced firsthand the value of skills that modern military training considered obsolete. "He's training his people to think differently," Donovan continued. "Keeps telling them that gear doesn't make the operator, that sometimes the old ways are better than the new tech." A rare smile creased his weathered face. "Reminds them to check their weapons one more time before deployment. Says the lives of their teammates depend on it." Morgan turned away, uncomfortable with the emotion this detail evoked. Wilson had learned the lesson she tried to teach him that day in the armory, had internalized it, and was now passing it on to others. "We need to move quickly," she said, refocusing on the tactical situation. "If Westfield is coming personally, it means he's identified this area as my likely location. We have maybe 48 hours before they triangulate this position." "What's the play?" Donovan asked, shifting seamlessly into operational planning. Morgan moved to her communications array, bringing up intercepted transmissions from Fort Granite. "Westfield is management, the head of Chimera. If we can capture him with evidence of the operation, we can expose the entire network. Capture a full bird colonel from a secure military installation. Donovan's skepticism was evident. That's a tall order, even for you. We don't need to extract him from the base, Morgan clarified. According to these transmissions, Grant is planning a field exercise for Delta Team 2 days after Westfield arrives, a simulated counter-sniper operation in the Eastern Training Range. Understanding dawned in Donovan's eyes. They're creating a scenario to flush you out. Exactly. They know I've been watching Delta since the ambush. They're betting that I'll continue that pattern, especially with Westfield on site personally overseeing the operation. It's a trap, Donovan said flatly. Morgan's smile held no warmth. Of course it is. But they're expecting Ghost Eye, the precision shooter from Unit Phantom, who follows established protocols and tactical doctrine that Westfield himself helped develop. She moved to a map of the Eastern Training Range, indicating key terrain features. They don't understand that Ghost Eye died in Raven Valley. The person watching them now operates by different rules with different limitations and capabilities. So we turn their trap against them, Donovan concluded. But even with the element of surprise, we're talking about going up against Delta Force operators with Westfield running tactical. The odds aren't good. We need help, Morgan acknowledged. Someone inside Fort Granite who can feed us real-time intelligence on Westfield's movements and security protocols. Donovan nodded slowly. Wilson, can we trust him? Donovan considered the question carefully. He's kept your identity secret despite significant pressure, and he's been asking questions about Chimera, discrete inquiries about unusual command decisions, personnel transfers, resource allocations. Kid's got good instincts. Morgan made her decision. Make contact. Minimal details, just enough for him to understand what we need. If he balks, we abort and go to Plan B. And Plan B is, Morgan's expression hardened. We do it the hard way, sir. Captain Michael Wilson moved through Fort Granite with the confidence of a man who had earned his position through fire. The promotion had come quickly after the Blue Sky incident, along with the command of the base's sniper training program, a coveted position that many had expected to go to a more senior officer. Some whispered that he had political connections. Others suggested his performance during the domestic extremist engagement had caught the attention of senior command. Wilson let them speculate. The truth was far more complex and far more dangerous. The training range echoed with the methodical rhythm of precision fire as Wilson observed his students practicing fundamental marksmanship skills, not the advanced techniques or exotic equipment that modern military training emphasized, but the core principles that had defined sniping since its inception: breath control, trigger discipline, environmental awareness. Remember, Wilson called out to his students, technology fails. Batteries die. Optics fog. When everything else goes to hell, these fundamentals are what will keep you and your team alive. His hand unconsciously traced the scar on his left shoulder, a permanent reminder of the Blue Sky ambush and the mysterious guardian who had saved his team from certain death. A young private approached with a clipboard. Sir Master Sergeant Donovan asked if you could inspect the new Barrett or rifles in the armory. Says there might be an issue with the firing pins. Wilson recognized the predetermined phrase immediately, a secure communication protocol Donovan had established for emergencies. Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes, Wilson replied casually, and have Stewart take over the range exercise. In the armory, Donovan was methodically disassembling a sniper rifle, his movements precise despite his age. The room was empty, unusual for this time of day, but not suspicious given Donovan's seniority and responsibility for weapons maintenance. Problem with the Barretts. Wilson asked for the benefit of any monitoring systems. Donovan nodded toward a storage room at the rear of the armory. In the back. Need your expertise. Inside the storage room, surrounded by crates of ammunition and weapons components, Donovan activated a small electronic device, a signal jammer, that would create a dead zone in any surveillance coverage. We have a situation, he said without preamble. Westfield is coming tomorrow. Wilson's expression darkened. The intel checks out, he's management. All evidence points that way, Donovan confirmed, and he's coming specifically to oversee a field exercise for Delta, a counter-sniper operation in the Eastern Training Range. They're setting a trap for her, Wilson realized immediately. And she's planning to spring it, Donovan replied, but she needs inside help. Wilson considered the implications carefully. He had kept Morgan's identity secret, had discreetly investigated Chimera's activities at Fort Granite, but active participation in an operation against a superior officer was a quantum leap beyond deniability. If Westfield really is behind Chimera, he's responsible for the deaths of dozens of American operators. Donovan continued, sensing Wilson's hesitation, including Morgan's entire team in Raven Valley. What does she need? Wilson asked, decision made. OAE's real-time intelligence on Westfield's movements during the exercise, security protocols, communications channels, tactical positioning, anything that gives her an edge. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. I can do better than that. Grant's put me in charge of planning the exercise, designing the entire counter-sniper scenario. I can build in vulnerabilities, create blind spots in their security coverage. That would significantly improve our odds, Donovan acknowledged. There's more, Wilson added. I've got 4 operators from my original Delta team who would follow me into hell without questions. Men who know something's wrong at Fort Granite but don't have the full picture. Donovan's expression turned cautious. The more people involved, the greater the risk of exposure. These are good men, Wilson insisted. Men who owe their lives to Morgan's intervention at Blue Sky. With their help, we could create multiple distractions during the exercise, divide the security force's attention. Donovan considered the proposal, weighing operational advantages against security risks. I'll present it to Morgan. Her call. Fair enough, Wilson agreed. When do we move? Exercise is scheduled for 0800 the day after tomorrow. We'll make contact at 0200 to confirm final details. Wilson committed the timing to memory. I'll have everything in place. Just tell me one thing, is she as good as I think she is? Donovan's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Son, you only saw her on a bad day. The Eastern Training Range stretched across 30 square kilometers of Montana wilderness, its varied terrain making it ideal for tactical exercises. Dense forest gave way to open meadows, rocky ridgelines overlooked narrow valleys, and abandoned mining structures provided urban warfare scenarios. From her observation position on the northern ridge, Morgan watched through high-powered optics as Fort Granite personnel established the exercise parameters. Vehicles delivered equipment, technical teams positioned sensors and targets, and security details conducted preliminary sweeps of the area. All standard procedure for a field exercise executed with textbook precision. Except for the additional security elements, the concealed observation post, the electronic surveillance network, the thermal imaging drones circling at high altitude. This wasn't just an exercise, it was an elaborate hunting operation with her as the target. Morgan shifted her focus to the command vehicle, an armored communications truck positioned at the southern edge of the range. According to Wilson's intelligence, that would be Westfield's Tactical Operations Center during the exercise, from which he would coordinate the effort to locate and capture her. Her tactical tablet displayed the updated intelligence. Wilson had provided security positions, communications frequencies, patrol routes, sensor coverage. Most critically, the timing of a scheduled communications blackout during the exercise, a simulated enemy electronic warfare attack that would temporarily disable the base's monitoring capabilities. A window of opportunity measured in minutes, requiring split-second timing and flawless execution. Her earpiece crackled with Donovan's voice. Ghost Eye, this is Eagle 6. Delta team is mobilizing. Wilson confirms Westfield arrived at Fort Granite 20 minutes ago. Currently in briefing with Grant. On copy that, Morgan acknowledged. What's your position? Eastern approach 2 kilometers from the command vehicle. Support package in place. Morgan checked her equipment one final time, her modified M4 carbine with suppressor, sidearm tactical tablet, and specialized electronics designed to defeat security systems. Not the loadout of a precision sniper, but of an infiltration specialist prepared for close quarters engagement. Remember the parameters, she reminded Donovan. Westfield is the primary objective. We need him alive with actionable evidence of Chimera. If the situation deteriorates, abort and extract to Rally Point Charlie. Understood, Donovan replied. Wilson's team is in position. They'll initiate diversionary actions at your signal. Morgan watched as vehicles departed Fort Granite, heading toward the training range. Through her optics, she identified the distinctive silhouette of Colonel Thomas Westfield in the lead vehicle, tall, broad-shouldered, with the rigid posture of career military. Even from a distance, the sight of him triggered cascading memories. Afghanistan 2015. You're not just a shooter, Sullivan, Colonel Westfield said, watching as she cleaned her rifle after the operation. You're an instrument of national policy. Sometimes that means making hard choices. Morgan continued her methodical maintenance, her movements precise despite 48 hours without sleep. With respect, sir, there was nothing hard about today's choice. Target was valid, threat was imminent, execution was clean. Westfield studied her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. And if the intelligence had been wrong, if that compound had contained civilians instead of insurgent leadership, then someone above my pay grade would have made a mistake, Morgan replied. My job is to hit what I'm aimed at. That's the difference between a shooter and an operator, Sullivan, Westfield said. A shooter follows orders. An operator understands context, evaluates intelligence, makes judgment calls when necessary. Morgan finally looked up from her weapon. Are you saying I should question mission parameters, sir? I'm saying that in Unit Phantom, you'll face situations where the rulebook doesn't apply, where you'll have to decide what serves the greater mission. Westfield's gaze was penetrating. I need to know you can make those decisions. I serve my country, sir, Morgan said firmly, whatever that requires. Westfield nodded, apparently satisfied. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The memory dissolved as Morgan refocused on the present moment. Now she understood what Westfield had really been asking that day, testing her willingness to operate outside official parameters to follow his vision of what serving the country meant. He had been grooming her for Chimera from the beginning, recruiting operators who demonstrated the moral flexibility to work outside traditional command structures. Exercise commencing in 30 minutes, Donovan reported. Wilson confirms Westfield has assumed tactical command. All Delta personnel have been briefed on counter-sniper protocols. Morgan acknowledged with a single click of her transmitter minimal communications discipline now that the operation was in motion. She moved from her observation position, beginning a circuitous approach toward the command vehicle, through terrain specifically selected to avoid sensor coverage. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. During the scheduled communications blackout, Wilson's team would create multiple diversions across the training range, drawing security forces away from the command vehicle. Morgan would infiltrate, capture Westfield, and extract evidence of Chimera from his personal devices. Donovan would provide overwatch and coordinate extraction once the objective was secured. The sun climbed higher as Morgan navigated the challenging terrain, every movement calculated to minimize visibility and avoid triggering sensors. Years of operating in hostile environments had taught her to move with the terrain rather than against it, to become part of the natural flow of the landscape. Her earpiece cracked with Wilson's voice, the first direct communication they'd had since the Blue Sky incident. Nighthawk, this is Echo Actual. Exercise parameters established. Westfield has positioned Delta teams in standard search pattern, emphasis on elevated positions with good sight lines. Communications blackout scheduled for 0937, duration 3 minutes. Confirm receipt. Morgan transmitted a double-click acknowledgement, impressed despite herself with Wilson's operational discipline. The young officer she'd encountered in the armory 3 months ago had matured into a capable tactical leader. At precisely 0935, Morgan reached her final position, a natural depression 200 meters from the command vehicle, offering concealment while maintaining visual contact with the objective. Through her optics, she could see Westfield inside the vehicle, monitoring the exercise through multiple display screens. 2 security personnel maintained position outside the vehicle, standard protection, detail alert, but not expecting a threat this close to the command center. The real security was the electronic surveillance network covering the surrounding area, which would detect any conventional approach. But Morgan wasn't using conventional tactics. At 0937, the scheduled communications blackout began. Fort Granite's monitoring systems went offline, creating a temporary blind spot in their surveillance coverage. Simultaneously, Morgan activated the electronic warfare package, ensuring the blackout would extend beyond its scheduled duration. Across the training range, Wilson's team initiated their diversionary actions, a series of controlled detonations designed to simulate sniper fire from multiple positions, drawing security forces away from the command center. Morgan moved immediately, approaching the command vehicle, not from cover as expected, but directly across open ground during the brief period when thermal imaging was unavailable. The security personnel, their attention drawn to the distant explosions, failed to notice her approach until she was within 10 meters. The first guard registered her presence and reached for his weapon, but Morgan was already in motion. A precision strike to the nerve cluster at the base of his neck rendered him unconscious before he could sound an alarm. The second guard managed to partially draw his sidearm before a similar strike incapacitated him. Both men down, no shots fired, 17 seconds elapsed since the blackout began. Morgan accessed the command vehicle through its rear entrance, moving with practiced efficiency into the communications center. Westfield was alone, still focused on the monitoring systems that had gone temporarily offline, his back to the entrance. "Hello, Colonel," Morgan said quietly. Westfield turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to something more complex. Recognition, calculation, and beneath it all, a hint of pride. "Sullivan, I was beginning to think you really were a ghost." In a manner of speaking, Morgan replied, her M4 trained on his center mass. "Hands where I can see them. Slow." Westfield complied with the casual confidence of a man who didn't consider himself in genuine danger. "Impressive operation. Coordinating with Wilson, extending the communications blackout, creating diversionary actions across multiple sectors. You've adapted well to your limitations." The casual reference to her injuries, the damaged ear, the trembling hand, confirmed what Morgan had suspected. Westfield had known she was alive all along. "Operation Chimera," she said. "You're going to give me everything, the complete organizational structure, financial networks, operational protocols. All of it." Westfield studied her with the analytical detachment of a chess master evaluating an opponent's move. "And why would I do that?" "Because otherwise I send the evidence I've already collected to every major news organization and intelligence agency in the world," Morgan stated flatly, "including the details of how you sacrificed your own unit Phantom team in Raven Valley to eliminate potential opposition to Chimera." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Westfield's features. "You've been busy, but you're missing the bigger picture, Sullivan, as usual." "Enlighten me," Morgan said, maintaining her weapon's aim. Westfield settled back against the communications console, his posture relaxed despite the M4 pointed at his chest. "After 30 years in the field, I saw a pattern emerging. Our conventional military approach was failing, too slow, too bureaucratic, too hamstrung by political constraints. So you decided to fix it by betraying your own people." Morgan's voice remained steady, but her finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger. "I decided to create a streamlined command structure outside the traditional hierarchy," Westfield corrected. "A mechanism for direct action unconstrained by political agendas or bureaucratic paralysis. Chimera isn't about personal gain. It's about ensuring America's strategic position in a world where conventional military dominance is increasingly challenged. By assassinating American operators, betraying your own soldiers." "Selective pruning," Westfield corrected with clinical detachment. "Removing elements that would resist necessary evolution. The same principle applies in nature. Sometimes individual organisms must be sacrificed for the species to advance." Morgan's grip tightened on her weapon. "That's how you justified Raven Valley Martinez, Haynes Young. They were just pruning." "They were soldiers who understood sacrifice," Westfield countered. "What do you think they died for, Sullivan? A flag, political platitudes. They died serving America's true interests, whether they knew it or not." His eyes narrowed. "We both know conventional warfare is obsolete. The real threats come from within: bureaucratic paralysis, political correctness, risk aversion. Chimera is the solution." "And what about Delta Team at Blue Sky? More necessary sacrifices?" Westfield's expression hardened. "That operation was specifically designed to draw you out a scenario you couldn't resist. The same psychological profile that made you an exceptional operative also makes you predictable in certain contexts." He gestured toward the monitoring systems, which remained offline. "For instance, your current operation follows established unit Phantom protocols for high-value target extraction with adaptations for your physical limitations. But the core methodology is unchanged, which means I can anticipate your next 3 moves." Morgan felt the first stirring of unease. Westfield's confidence wasn't just arrogance, it was the calculated certainty of someone who had prepared for this confrontation. "The communications blackout was your window of opportunity," Westfield continued. "But did you really think we wouldn't have contingencies for that exact scenario, especially when Wilson's involvement became apparent?" The realization hit Morgan just as the vehicle's internal systems reactivated a secondary power source independent of Fort Granite's main grid. The monitoring screens displayed multiple security teams converging on their position, having ignored the diversionary actions entirely. "Your mistake was trusting Wilson," Westfield said, almost sympathetically. "He's been working for me since 3 days after Blue Sky. His promotion, his access to exercise planning, his apparent investigation of Chimera, all designed to gain your confidence." Morgan's tactical mind raced, evaluating options, calculating odds. The approaching security teams would reach their position in less than 2 minutes. Extraction routes were rapidly being cut off. "You're lying," she said, though a seed of doubt had been planted. Wilson's convenient access to critical information, his rapid promotion, the ease with which he had infiltrated security protocols, all could be explained as part of an elaborate counterintelligence operation. "Am I foul?" Westfield challenged. "How do you think we knew exactly where to look for you? Why do you think I came personally to oversee this operation? Wilson has been feeding us intelligence on your movements, your methods, your weaknesses." He gestured toward her left hand, where the tremor had intensified under stress. "Including your deteriorating physical condition. The nerve damage is progressing, and isn't it? Soon you won't be able to hold a weapon at all." Morgan's resolve hardened. Whether Westfield was bluffing about Wilson or not, the tactical situation had deteriorated beyond salvation. The primary objective remained capturing Westfield with evidence of Chimera, but extraction now seemed impossible. "Even if you kill me, Chimera continues," Westfield said, recognizing her calculation. "The organization is designed to survive the loss of any individual, even me. There are contingency protocols, successor chains, autonomous cells that will activate if I don't check in at specified intervals." "Then I'll dismantle it piece by piece," Morgan promised. Westfield's expression showed genuine regret. "You still don't understand, Sullivan. You can't defeat Chimera because Chimera isn't just an organization, it's the natural evolution of American military power, the inevitable response to a changing global landscape." Outside, the security teams had established a perimeter around the command vehicle. Morgan's tactical tablet showed all extraction routes, now covered by multiple operators with overlapping fields of fire. "No way out." Her earpiece crackled with Donovan's voice. "Ghost Eye, be advised, multiple hostile elements converging on your position. Wilson's team is not responding. Recommend immediate extraction via contingency route Delta." Morgan acknowledged with a click, maintaining her focus on Westfield. Route Delta was their prearranged code for the highest risk extraction plan, a direct confrontation requiring maximum aggression and accepting significant casualties. "One last chance, Colonel," she said. "Surrender and provide full disclosure on Chimera." Westfield's smile held no warmth. "We both know that's not going to happen, Sullivan. So what's your play? Kill me and try to fight your way out. Even with your skills, the odds are prohibitive." Morgan's response was cut short by the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching rapidly from the north, not the light observation helicopters used in the exercise, but the heavier thrum of combat aircraft. Confusion crossed Westfield's features for the first time. "That's not part of the exercise protocol." Morgan's earpiece crackled again, but not with Donovan's voice. "Nighthawk, this is Archangel, coming in hot from your north ETA 30 seconds. Be advised we are weapons hot. Authentication code Martinez 9 Delta." The authentication code, a reference to her fallen spotter, combined with their 9th operation together, was one that only a handful of people in the world would know. An Archangel was the call sign for the Pentagon's Direct Action Counterterrorism Unit, a force that operated outside standard military command structures. Understanding dawned in Westfield's eyes as he registered the approaching helicopters and Morgan's changed demeanor. You weren't working with Wilson, he realized. You had another channel. Donovan's old war buddy, Morgan confirmed as the helicopters thundered overhead. Colonel Arthur Hayes, Joint Special Operations Command. You knew Frank from Desert Storm, didn't you? You never realized he maintained contact with Hayes all these years, keeping a watchful eye on former unit Phantom operations. Outside, the security team scattered as the lead helicopter's door gunner fired warning bursts into the ground near their positions. Hayes has been building a case against Chimera for months, but needed concrete evidence linking you directly to the operation. Morgan continued. After Blue Sky, when I transmitted the intel I'd gathered from the enemy command post, Hayes was the one who received it. The Joint Chiefs authorized a classified investigation that bypassed normal channels, exactly the kind of streamlined command structure you claim to want. Westfield's composed facade cracked slightly as he processed this reversal. Hayes doesn't have the authority for a direct action operation on American soil against a serving officer. He's overstepping his jurisdiction. Actually, he has explicit presidential authorization, Morgan corrected. The evidence I collected was enough to convince the Joint Chiefs that Chimera represented a critical internal threat. They've been building a case quietly waiting for you to expose yourself. The helicopters landed in a staggered formation around the command vehicle, disgorging special operations personnel who moved with practiced precision to secure the area. "It's over, Colonel," Morgan said as the vehicle's door was breached by JSOC operators. "Chimera is finished." Westfield's expression hardened into something cold and unyielding. "Chimera was never just about me, Sullivan. The principles it represents, streamlined command decisive action, freedom from political constraints, those don't die with one operation or one leader." "Maybe not," Morgan acknowledged as the operator secured Westfield. "But the men and women who died because of your principles deserve justice. Martinez, Haynes, Young, they deserve better than to be sacrificed for your vision of American power." As Westfield was led away, Colonel Arthur Hayes entered the command vehicle, a weathered veteran with the hardened demeanor of someone who had spent decades in the shadows of American military operations. "Sullivan," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "Donovan told me you were everything the legend said. Glad to see he wasn't exaggerating." "How long have you been watching Chimera?" Morgan asked, finally lowering her weapon. "Since about 6 months after Raven Valley," Hayes replied. "Donovan contacted me when he noticed discrepancies in the official report. We've been building a case ever since, but Westfield was careful, compartmentalized operations, deniable assets, minimal electronic footprint, until Blue Sky forced his hand. And Wilson, one of ours from the beginning," Hayes confirmed. "After the ambush, his questions about the official report caught our attention. We recruited him as a counterintelligence asset, feeding Westfield carefully crafted disinformation while gathering evidence against Chimera." Relief washed through Morgan's system, though she kept her expression neutral. The mission was complete. Chimera exposed. Justice for her fallen teammates finally within reach. "What happens now?" she asked. Hayes studied her with evaluating eyes. "Officially, Morgan Sullivan died in Raven Valley. Your status remains KIA in all official records with appropriate medals awarded posthumously." The implication was clear. Her return from the dead would raise too many questions, create too many complications for an intelligence community already struggling with the revelation of Chimera's existence. "And unofficially," Morgan pressed. "Unofficially, there's still work to be done," Hayes replied. "Chimera's international connections, their financial networks, the full extent of their operations, we've only scratched the surface. We need someone who understands how they think, how they operate, someone who can work in the shadows." Morgan considered the offer implicit in his words. "Return to operational status, but under a new identity, a new designation. Continue the life of a ghost hunting the remnants of Chimera across the global landscape. I'll need resources," she said, decision made, "and operational autonomy." Hayes nodded, unsurprised by her response. "You'll have whatever you need. Donovan's agreed to come on as your support coordinator, says he's postponing retirement until the job's finished." A hint of a smile touched Morgan's lips. "Stubborn old man." "The best kind," Hayes agreed. "There's a transport waiting to take you to a secure facility where we can discuss operational parameters. Wilson and his team have been briefed on the basics. They'll maintain the official narrative here while we extract you." As they exited the command vehicle, Morgan paused to look back at Fort Granite, in the distance the base that had been her home and prison for the past 2 years. The place where she had rebuilt herself from the broken operative who had survived Raven Valley into something new. Not Ghost Eye anymore. Something different. Stronger in some ways, more vulnerable in others, but fundamentally changed by the experience of death and resurrection. 1 year later, Captain Michael Wilson stood on the sniper range at Fort Granite, watching his newest class of students practice the fundamentals of precision shooting. The base had changed significantly since the Chimera revelation, new command structure, enhanced oversight protocols, regular security audits by JSOC personnel. The official story maintained that domestic extremists had indeed attacked the Blue Sky facility, but with the additional detail that a specialized counterterrorism unit had provided support to Delta Team. Colonel Westfield had been quietly removed from service, his case handled through classified military justice channels to avoid public exposure of Chimera's existence. Wilson had received a commendation for his role in exposing the conspiracy, though the details remained highly classified. His sniper training program had become a model for other facilities, emphasizing adaptability and fundamental skills over reliance on technology. Captain, a voice called from the range entrance. Master Sergeant Donovan, now officially retired, but visiting as a civilian consultant, approached with his characteristic measured gait. Sergeant Major, Wilson greeted him with respect. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Just passing through, Donovan replied. Thought I'd check on your progress with the new curriculum. They walked together along the range perimeter, their conversation casual but purposeful. Any word from our mutual friend? Wilson asked when they were beyond earshot of others. Donovan's weathered face revealed nothing. Operational in the eastern Mediterranean, making progress on dismantling Chimera's foreign networks. Wilson nodded satisfied. Though he had no official connection to Morgan's continued operations, Donovan occasionally provided updates on her activities, a courtesy to the man who had helped expose Westfield. I have something for her, Donovan added, handing Wilson a small package. If you have a secure channel, monthly supply drop. Wilson confirmed, accepting the package without examining its contents. I'll make sure it's included. As Donovan prepared to leave, he paused, looking out over the sniper range where young operators practiced their craft. You're doing good work here, Wilson, teaching them the things that really matter. Learn from the best, Wilson replied. Tell her that her lessons haven't been forgotten. Donovan nodded, a rare smile creasing his weathered features. She knows. Trust me, she's watching. High in the mountains overlooking Fort Granite, beyond the range of conventional surveillance, a solitary figure stood on a rocky outcropping. Through specialized optics, Morgan Sullivan observed the training exercises below, watching as Wilson's students practiced the techniques she had employed to save their instructor's life a year earlier. Her left hand still trembled slightly as she lowered the binoculars, the nerve damage a permanent reminder of what she had endured. But the tremor no longer defined her capabilities. She had adapted, developed new techniques, transformed limitations into alternative approaches. The radio beside her crackled with Hayes's voice, outlining her next assignment. Another Chimera cell identified in North Africa, another piece of Westfield's legacy to dismantle. Morgan acknowledged the transmission with practiced efficiency, but remained on the outcropping a moment longer, watching the distant figures at Fort Granite. Young operators learning their craft, unaware of the invisible guardians who had preserved their opportunity to serve. The true legacy of Morgan Sullivan wasn't measured in enemies defeated or conspiracies exposed, but in the quiet commitment to stand against darkness even when standing alone. Not for recognition or reward, but because honor demanded nothing less. Ghost Eye had died in Raven Valley. Nighthawk had emerged at Blue Sky, and now a new identity for a continuing mission. Shadow Sentinel, guardian of the shadows, protector of those who would never know her name. Morgan shouldered her pack and turned away from Fort Granite, moving with practiced silence into the wilderness. The hunt continued,